Yeah, well, that's one aspect, but food miles actually, if you go to the next slide, basically they've done studies. You know, we have a very complex food production and transport system. So we used to grow food, a lot more food locally. It's gone mainly out to these large areas that we have subsidized over the years by the federal government with transportation networks, with irrigation systems. And really they say that food typically travels from 1,500 to 2,500 miles from the farm to consumer's table. So that's what the real issue, you know, that's one of the main issues of food miles. But you're right, the inputs, it's difficult. For instance, there are 3 organic dairies here in Louisiana. Or there were, I don't know if they're still hanging in there. But inputs is a critical factor. But that would be another talk, just about the issue of organic versus conventional. I'm not really promoting one or the other. I'm looking more at sustainability and the issue of supporting local farms and families. So this is a list of reasons, you know, why we should buy local food. Many consider it to be fresher. It's usually harvested the day before or 2 days before you go and buy it, like a farmer's market or a farm stand. It can often be tastier because if it's grown locally, they will often let it ripen on the vine when they harvest it because there's less transportation issues. It's easier to pack and bring to market. It can be more nutritious. You pick it at ripe maturity, ripe value. Sometimes after you harvest, you actually lose nutrients. It's broken down. It supports local farmers and keeps more of your food dollar working in your hometown. It conserves energy, reduces the output of greenhouse gases, and I think the last one is when I think about some of the projects we have with students. This is one of the most important things for me personally, is we need to all understand where our food comes from. So here's a list of local and community food program components. And I'll go through some of these, but nutrition education, market gardening, community gardening, youth gardening, school gardening, some of these are very similar. CSA, I'll talk about that in a minute, but you know, basically building businesses, small-scale businesses, farm businesses, small families. Gleaning, there used to be a master gardener here in Baton Rouge that used to glean product from the research station and donating to the food bank. Consumer education and marketing, buying clubs. We actually had tried a buying club at the community garden at one time. It lasted for about a couple months. And there were issues with that. Business training, community kitchens, farm-to-school programs, farmers markets, food policy councils. New Orleans has a food policy council that started about a year ago. Here in this town, we don't actually have one as yet. So, school gardening, this is actually up at Park Elementary. We had a program for about a year and a half there, and our interest was in, you know, can we interest students in science through gardening and garden-based activities, and can we impact their attitudes towards fruits and vegetables? And the overwhelming research is we can, to some extent. You know, generally, if somebody grows their own food, they're likely to consume more of it. And here we have some of the rogues gallery from our community garden. some of them are in here. I don't know when that was. That was, I think, 2007. We have a garden on campus here, the Hill Farm Community Garden. Youth gardening, this is from our summer program. Students from McKinley High School. We've done this for 4 years now, which has been a real interesting project to have, and they were selling hot sauce, and I can talk about this later if anybody's interested in this. We actually, you see I have to 2009. Every year, about this time, we are scrounging and writing grants to support this program because it's kind of an ad hoc group of people working together to bring this 8-week summer program to Louisiana. Market gardening, and one of the nice things that I did with our church was to go to Cuba and got to see the organic markets, organic gardens in Cuba that they're feeding people in the cities, growing food in the cities. So market gardening, growing food in small half-acre to acre lots. Okay. CSA. We used to have some CSAs here. How many of you are familiar with the term CSA? Community Support Act? Well, quite a few. I don't think actually at least in this area, we do not have a CSA that's functioning. There may be one in New Orleans or some young growers north of New Orleans that are getting involved with that. But basically, it's local community members, consumers working with growers. Basically, it's a subscription service where you would pay up front for a certain number of weeks to receive produce each week. This is actually up in upstate New York. My sister and brother-in-law are members of this CSA, and partly you can have a reduced share if you work, and we spent an afternoon weeding in their garden, but they have full shares and partial shares, so you can kind of get an idea. It's like each week you would have one red head lettuce, one green, spinach, snow peas, shelling peas, Swiss chard, tarragon, some herbs, scallions. So that's kind of how it works. Farmers markets. This was in January. I think the temperature was about 30 degrees when I took this picture because I had to be careful with my camera. You can see that this person here is all bundled up, but you know, apples, even in an urban situation, we have farmers markets. There's like 12, I think it used to be 12 green markets in New York City. See the product they were able to store, they would produce it and then bring it to the market. And then the next slide is the Red Stick Farmers Market. This is actually, you can tell it's an older picture of my family at the market. But I like the market because it's interaction in the community. We have, you know, celebrity chefs there. There's entertainment. This is inside the garage. I hate to go in the garage, but that's what we have to do with the weather we have here. So, you know, farmers market there. And the next slide will show, basically we have a tremendous increase in farmers markets, and there's opportunities for people to get into farming and make a living growing food again in this country. So you see that, you know, an astronomical increase in the number of farmers markets. We see that here in Baton Rouge, whereas 20 years ago we didn't have any farmers markets. There's like 3 here. New Orleans, there's markets springing up all over. So, and there's almost 4,000 farmers markets in the United States. I think New York has something like 350 farmers markets in operation. Community kitchens, there's the Jubilee Project in East Tennessee. These often will go into schools that have been closed down, and they'll form consortium that will assist development of recipes and food production. So if somebody has, let's say, a lot of tomatoes left over, they could make salsa and commercially grow and make processing products there for sale. So preparing, cooking, filling, labeling, flash freezing, and cooling food for sale. I really don't know of a community kitchen situation here in this area or in Louisiana. Does anybody know about it? Farm to school programs often will be garden sessions, garden-based nutrition education, garden tasting, farm field trips, local food in school, lunches. This was over at University Terrace, and you can see the kids that were growing lettuce. Some of them had never really tried lettuce before. It often helps to have salad dressing for them to dip into, to drench their lettuce and radishes. But one of the original projects was the Edible Schoolyard with Alice Waters. There is an Edible Schoolyard in New Orleans. It's the Samuel Green School, and they're actually, this school is now working on becoming an Edible Schoolyard too. So there's a lot of opportunities here in Baton Rouge for that. So again, I listed all these, you know, local food, community food, sustainable agriculture projects, and okay. The next, I was going to talk a little bit about slow food. We actually have started up a slow food Baton Rouge chapter, and it is a movement that started out in Europe, and it's in contrast to fast food. And I think the spur was, I think, McDonald's opening up about 20 years ago in Europe, and people said, no, we'd rather look at our local and support our local food traditions. But basically, and this came off their website, linking the pleasure of food with the commitment to community and the environment. So you see again, talking about food, the community, environmental issues, as we have with sustainability and local foods. So here's a long thing, but again, equity, sustainability, and pleasure in the food that we eat. And their slogan is a world in which all people can eat food that is good for them, good for the people who grow it, and good for the planet. So if you're interested, I'll put a plug in for Slow Food Baton Rouge, where we started actually in October. Kind of small group of us working on this.
And we need members.
Yep.
And you can tell them how to do that, honey.
Well, yeah, if you go back, there's the slowfoodbtr@gmail. So you can contact us that way or just call us.
Hey, Joe.
Yeah, call Cheryl. Don't call me. Yeah, since you raised that issue. Okay. But they have a lot of programs, food education and endangered foods, but slow food in schools, slow food on campus, a lot of educational projects. They have US Art and Taste. They have a meeting in Italy that I've never been to, but I hear is very, very nice to go to. So there are local chapters. If you go to the website, you'll see that we are listed as a chapter for them. So, I was going to transition a little bit here. We are going to be showing the film Food Inc. Probably in April. We have a grant to show it, and we'll be showing it probably, we haven't talked to them directly about it, but over at the McKinley Alumni Center. Bless you. And so we'll be showing, has anybody seen this film yet? So I think it's somewhat controversial. Yeah, I showed it to my father, who was a retired county agent, and he was not happy. But he grew, and he had retired in the late 70s, and I said, Dad, you know, the world's changing. But there's some aspects to it, and this is what, on their promotional material, this is what they suggest in terms of food. You know, stop drinking sodas and other sweetened beverages. I've actually tried to, I'm looking at labels. If you read, anybody ever read In Defense of Food? Because he basically says if there's more than, what, 3 or 4, more than 5 ingredients in your food, and usually you see high fructose corn syrup in most of the foods that we eat that are either minimally processed or heavily processed. And just by cutting that out, it says you can lose 25 pounds in a year by replacing 1 20-ounce soda a day with a no-calorie beverage. So I'm drinking coffee now, which I guess I need to have decaffeinated coffee, right, in the afternoon. Eat at home instead of eating out. That's one thing that hasn't been very hard for us because we eat a lot of meals at home, which also means that we may not eat till 9 o'clock at night because we're always working at it. And but they say that children consume almost twice as many calories with eating food prepared outside the home. There's a good scene in Food Inc. about people and going to eat at McDonald's, I think it is, or a fast food place, and how that impacts our lives. The other issue that they raise is to have chain restaurants post calorie information on menus and menu boards. And this is one I think is going to be a tough one because the schools rely on the profits from selling soda and these items, right? But to tell schools to stop selling sodas, junk food, and sports drinks. And as you all know, the rates of obesity have tripled in children and adolescents aged 6 to 19 years. Later on, there'll be somebody speaking at Food for Thought about diet and the importance of food and what types of food in our diet. Meatless Mondays, for those of you that are vegetarians or vegan, this is not a hard thing for you to do, right? But go without meat 1 day a week. And it's estimated that 70% of all antibiotics used in the United States are given to farm animals. We're seeing resistance to antibiotics in humans because we're consuming meat that has a lot of antibiotics given to them. So if you have more pasture-raised animals, depending on the situation, a lot of times they don't have to use a lot of antibiotics. And bioorganic or sustainable food with little or no pesticides. And our industrial food system, we do actually use a lot of pesticides. And in organic production, we also use pesticides. So that's something to be thought of. Protect family farms, visit your local farmers market. Farmers markets allow farmers to keep 80 to 90 cents of each dollar spent by the consumer. They also look at the turnover. When you spend